In this video, I'm going to be talking about flooding. So I made a couple of videos, one on operant conditioning, one on classical conditioning, and now I'm going to break down a little bit more of what classical conditioning means. So if you want to understand this video, I suggest you watch those previous videos, and then this video will make a little bit more sense. Because now we're going to be talking about what flooding is. Just real quick, let's review. Operant conditioning is mechanical and it deals with consequences. The animal, the subject, needs to understand the relation between the consequence and the behavior in order to do more of those behaviors or do less of those behaviors, depending on which consequence the animal wants to exchange. It's mathematical, it's mechanical, whereas classical conditioning is more associative. It deals with associations that the animal makes. These associations could be in relation to certain verbal cues, to environmental cues, where the animal understands when this environment looks a certain way or feels a certain way, then the response that elicits from the animal is such and such and such. So it's association, and it's a little bit more on the emotional aspect of learning. So the classical conditioning learning deals with the responses that certain cues or environmental cues elicit from the subject, from the animal. So let's break that down a little bit more in terms of classical conditioning and how we can change that. So in this video, I'm talking about flooding specifically. There are different ways to change the way an animal feels about its environment, wanting to improve the associations that a dog has with the environment, because we want to change the response that it's eliciting from the animal. So let's talk about how we do that. I'm going to give you a hypothetical example, and I'm going to illustrate it through flooding. So in this hypothetical example, let's say your dog or the dog you're working with does not like fans. This is a very general, broad example. You can fill in the blanks, whatever example works for you. But in this example, let's just imagine the dog doesn't like fans, box fans, okay, big fans. And when the fan is on in a room, let's say the dog suddenly feels uncomfortable being in that room. The dog goes, I don't want to be in that room, makes me uncomfortable. The fan is on. The fan's off, I can be in that room. Fan's on, I don't like it. The dog now has a fear response. So now the dog is uncomfortable going in there. Okay, what do we do from here? How do we change that response? Now we're going to use flooding as the example. In the example, let's say the doorway is the threshold, literally the threshold, right? And it is the distance, the critical distance in which outside of that doorway, outside of that room, the dog is comfortable, and inside that room, the dog is uncomfortable. So with flooding, what we do is we bring the subject, we bring the animal in the room, in the area where the dog is uncomfortable. There is really not a gradual procedure, because if we make it gradual, it would be a different approach. The different approach could be systematic desensitization. And we're not talking about systematic desensitization. We're not talking about habituation. We're talking about flooding. So in the example of flooding, the animal gets brought into the area that they are uncomfortable with. It's been determined that that's the case. What happens from here in order for flooding to take place is now the dog's option to escape gets taken away. All right, so now the dog is in the room and it cannot take off. It now has to face its fears, so to speak. It has to be in that environment and deal with its fear. Now, the fear that it has is, it's probably something along the lines of, that fan is going to hurt me. It's so loud, it's so weird that it's probably dangerous for me to be in that room. When you look at the fear responses that animals have to certain things that don't make sense, nothing bad will happen, but from the perspective of the animal is looking at it as, this is putting my livelihood and possible danger. So we can't rationalize to the animal and tell them, no, it's not, right? It's just responding based on the response that this stimulus is eliciting from the animal. So we basically let the dog, through flooding, we let the dog deal with it and realize that the fan never actually did anything to it. It's really pretty cut and dry, just like that. There is no feeding. We're not feeding the dog, because that would be something else. That would be counter conditioning. We're not feeding the dog. We're not playing with the dog. We're not petting the dog. This is very impersonal, and the dog is learning through this process how its fears never actually realize. And the dog now gets put in this position where they go, something's going to happen, and nothing happens. Obviously, for this to take a longer effect, for this to be more long lasting, typically several sessions need to happen. All right, so I'm going to give you some practical examples that I have used flooding with. I've used flooding when it comes to crate training. Dogs, they have some sort of fear to the crate. So what we do, a lot of people do this actually without realizing it. But what we do is we really give the dog no option to escape. You go in the crate and we just make you face your fear. And as soon as you face your fear, realize nothing bad has happened, you're out. And then you're in, and then you're out, and then you're in, and then you're out. And we do this over and over and over. Let the dog go into the area that they are uncomfortable with. And we do this through several repetitions, several sessions. And at some point, you realize that the dog learns nothing bad actually happens, and they lose that fear. I've seen it happen with my own very eyes. I've experienced it myself because I've done it myself as well with my fears. Imagine like the person that doesn't like to talk in front of people, right? They're terrified to talk in front of people. Well, we could give them a lot of money and tell them, hey, dude, like, I'll give you lots of money. Like, I'll give you, we'll pay you $1,000 to talk for like 20 minutes. If the person's scared enough, they're not going to care. They're like, I don't care about the $1,000. It is a terrifying experience, right? So counter conditioning for that person might not work. And it's the same with some dogs. Some dogs are so terrified of the environment that they're not even going to eat or play. They just go, I'd rather not eat because this environment is so scary. So going back to the example of the person that doesn't like to talk in public, doesn't like to speak, if we give that person no other option, okay, let's say this person works for a company and the company goes, you have to give this presentation. What happens is now this is flooding. The option to escape is not there, right? Or if you're in the military where that's not even an option, if you have to give training, you have to give training. There is no, oh, you don't feel like doing it? We'll ask somebody else to do it. No. So what happens is now the option to not do it is not there. We put you in that situation, and then what happens is it is uncomfortable. It's very, very weird. But if we make you do this often enough, what will happen is you will get better. You will lose the fear of talking in public. Okay, you'll become more and more comfortable with the idea of doing it because you have done it so many times, right? And we forced you to do it. That's flooding in another example. So in general, that's what flooding is. To get more details on this topic, I made a video in my members area where I go into a little bit more detail than I go over in this video. Flooding is a complex topic, so we can only address it so much in a short video. So check out that video, check out that link if you're interested. And on the next topic, on the next video, we'll talk about a different form of classical conditioning.